Monterey, California. The town was a postcard come to life, a beautiful coastal haven where the sea kissed the shore, and the waves whispered secrets to those who listened. But as with all places of beauty, there were shadows that lingered in the corners, hidden beneath the calm surface. Maya, 45, stood by her kitchen window, staring out at the ocean. She had lived in Monterey for just over a year now, yet the ocean's vastness still held a sense of awe and fear for her. The crashing waves felt like a reflection of her inner turmoil. She'd never planned on being a single mother, but here she was, alone with her son Noah, who was now 16 and growing distant. Her divorce from Ethan, a man she once thought she'd spend forever with, had left her fractured in ways she still couldn't quite comprehend. There were days when she wondered if she'd ever find peace again. "Mom." Noah's voice broke through her thoughts, harsh and impatient. Maya turned. "What?" Noah was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face locked in a scowl that had become all too familiar in the past year. "You said we were leaving for the beach today. You promised." She glanced at the clock. He was right. She'd promised Noah they would spend the afternoon at the beach, just the two of them. It was a tradition from before the divorce, a way to reclaim the connection they had lost. But today, it felt harder to go through the motions. I know, Maya said, her voice soft, but filled with the weight of unspoken regret. "Let me just get my things together." As she moved to gather her beach bag, her phone buzzed on the counter. Maya glanced at it, the name on the screen instantly tightening her chest. "Claire." She hesitated, then answered. "Hey Claire." "Hi Maya. Are you still coming to the fundraiser tonight?" Claire's voice was bright, almost too bright, as though she were trying to cover something up. Maya bit her lip, feeling the familiar discomfort in her chest. She'd known Claire for a few months, and while their friendship had grown, there was always a tension between them, a quiet undercurrent of judgment, as if they were both trying to pretend everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Maya didn't know if she could handle one more social event where everything felt forced, but she didn't want to disappoint Claire. "I'll try to make it," Maya said, though she wasn't sure if she would. "Great. I'll see you there then," Claire replied, her tone too chipper, before hanging up. Maya set the phone down, staring at the screen for a moment, before shaking her head. She wasn't sure why she felt obligated to go. It wasn't like Claire was a lifelong friend, but there was something about the way Claire smiled, always so perfectly composed, that made Maya feel like she was missing something in her own life. The sound of Noah's voice broke her from her thoughts again. "Come on, Mom. We're wasting daylight." Claire, 48, stood in her pristine living room, adjusting the edges of the tablecloth as if she could smooth out all the imperfections in her life by doing so. Her husband, Dave, was in his office, likely working on yet another project, and the house felt unusually quiet. The children, their teenage twins, were off doing their own things, and Claire often felt like an outsider in her own home. She glanced at her reflection in the glass of the framed family photo on the mantel. She looked the part, perfectly put together, hair styled just so, makeup applied with expert precision. But beneath that polished exterior, there was a loneliness that no amount of effort could hide. Her marriage had been strained for years, though no one outside of their home knew. She hadn't told anyone about the long nights where they slept in separate rooms or the silences that hung between her and Dave. At times, she wondered if they had forgotten how to talk to each other, or if they were simply waiting for the inevitable collapse that neither of them had the courage to initiate. "Claire." Dave's voice echoed from the hallway, pulling her out of her reverie. She turned. "Yes. Just wanted to check in. Are you sure you want to go through with this fundraiser tonight? I know you're tired." Her heart sank. There it was again, the subtle reminder that she was always the one who had to keep up appearances. The one who had to make sure everything ran smoothly, even if it meant putting her own needs aside. "I'll be fine," Claire said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to do this. We both need it." Laura, 50, was the new girl in town. She hadn't meant to move to Monterey, but life had a way of pushing her in directions she wasn't ready to go. After losing her job as a senior executive at a tech company, she had found herself starting over in a town she knew nothing about. The move had been an impulsive decision, one she made in the dead of night, when everything felt too heavy to bear. She hadn't told anyone about her career failure, though she knew the rumors would start to circulate soon enough. She hadn't been able to maintain the career she had worked so hard to build, and the sting of it still lingered. The truth was, She didn't know who she was without her title, her position, the status that came with it. Now she was just Laura. Laura stood at the edge of the water, the salt air biting at her skin as she looked out over the vast expanse of the Pacific. The waves seemed endless, just like her uncertainty. The house she had rented was small, nothing like the sprawling home she once lived in, but it was hers for now. She could hear the soft rustle of the wind through the trees behind her and the distant laughter of children playing on the sand. For a moment, she thought about calling her sister, but the thought of explaining her situation, again, felt exhausting. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her and stepped into the soft sand. Maybe she would go to the fundraiser tonight. A chance to meet people, to make connections. It wasn't as if she had much else going on. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt that old familiar ache, like she was trying to fit herself into a mold that wasn't hers to fill. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, all three women were unknowingly moving toward the same event, each hiding a secret, each carrying the weight of choices made, and each struggling to maintain control over lives that felt like they were slipping away from them. Their worlds were about to collide in ways they couldn't predict. Tonight, nothing would remain the same. Monterey was the type of place where everyone smiled, and yet no one truly saw each other. On the surface, it was picturesque, tree-lined streets, charming houses with well-kept gardens, children laughing in the yards, and friends exchanging pleasantries over picket fences. It was a town that seemed built on the illusion of perfection, an illusion that Maya, Claire, and Laura had all bought into at one point or another. Maya was pacing in her living room, her fingers nervously flipping through the pages of a book she wasn't really reading. She had promised Noah they would spend the day together, but now she wasn't so sure. The weight of it all felt like too much. The emptiness that lingered between them, a silence that no longer needed words, was harder to bear with each passing day. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire, confirming their plans for the community fundraiser that evening. Maya, you're coming, right? Don't let me be the only one without backup. Maya stared at the message for a moment. She knew Claire well enough to sense the unspoken pressure behind her words. Claire always needed someone to validate her efforts, her meticulously curated life. Maya had come to admire her ability to keep it all together, her seemingly perfect family, her picture-perfect house, her social calendar that never appeared to waver. But deep down, Maya wondered what it was Claire was hiding behind that flawless exterior. Everyone had secrets. Some were bigger than others. Noah's voice broke through her thoughts again, calling from the kitchen. Mom, are you coming? She stood up, slipping her phone into her pocket, and walked toward the back door. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes glued to his phone, not making eye contact. We'll go in a minute, she said. Let's just finish getting ready. Noah nodded, his gaze never leaving the screen. Maya sighed, wondering when the distance had started growing between them. Had it always been there, hidden beneath the surface, or was it something that had happened gradually after the divorce? She wasn't sure. But one thing she knew for certain was that Noah was still her son, and she was determined to hold on to whatever was left of their connection. Claire, on the other hand, was already preparing for the evening. She stood in front of her closet, choosing the perfect dress. A muted navy blue. Simple, elegant, and understated. Claire was nothing if not precise. She was meticulously put together, always in control, and she prided herself on the image of perfection she had cultivated over the years. She adjusted her earrings in the mirror, making sure every detail was just right. If she was going to host this event, it would be flawless, like everything else in her life. Behind her, Dave wandered into the room. He stood there for a moment, watching her without saying anything. Claire didn't need to ask if he was going with her tonight, he had already made his decision. He never had much interest in these social gatherings anymore. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was just easier for him to hide behind work. I'll stay home, he said finally, his tone flat. Claire didn't respond immediately. She glanced at her reflection once more, taking in the image of herself in the dress, perfect and poised. A woman who had it all together. And yet, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was simply pretending. Pretending that everything was fine in her marriage. Pretending that her children were thriving. Pretending that her life was anything but a well-organized facade. Fine, Claire said, her voice cool. But don't be surprised if I'm late. Dave shrugged, uninterested. And with that, Claire turned on her heels, grabbed her purse, and walked out the door, her mind already racing through the night ahead. She knew what was expected of her, Make small talk, smile, thank people for their donations, and be the picture of graciousness. The usual routine. She didn't let herself think too hard about the cracks in her life. Not tonight. Laura was standing by the water again, her bare feet sinking into the wet sand as she watched the waves crash against the rocks. She had promised herself that she would stop running, that she would take a moment to breathe, to reset. Moving to Monterey had been a fresh start, or so she had hoped. But now, after a few months of settling into the house, she wasn't so sure. Every day felt like a new battle to carve out some sense of belonging, some sense of herself. She had tried to meet people, joined a few yoga classes, made small talk with her neighbors, even volunteered at the local animal shelter. But it felt like she was always on the outside, looking in. People were kind enough, but she never truly felt like she fit. Tonight's fundraiser was a chance to change that. It was a chance to finally step out of the shadows and into the light, to make new friends, to find a place in this community. But as the event loomed closer, a wave of anxiety washed over her. What if she didn't belong here either? What if this was just another place she didn't fit into, another failure? Shaking her head, she decided to focus on the positives. This was an opportunity, not just a social obligation. She had to start somewhere. As she walked toward her car, she noticed a group of women chatting in front of a nearby cafe. They all appeared to know each other, laughing and sharing stories. Laura's chest tightened. She wanted to be a part of that group, to laugh freely and share in the camaraderie. But she wasn't sure how to break into their world. Still, she would try. She had to. The fundraiser could be the first step towards something better. Later that evening, at the fundraiser, the perfect masks would slip, and the truth would begin to surface. It wasn't going to be one explosive revelation, nothing that dramatic. It would start slowly, almost imperceptibly. The tension in the air would be palpable, like an electric current humming beneath the surface. It would take time, but sooner or later, the cracks in their carefully constructed lives would begin to show. And nothing, not even the most polished facade, could hide the truth forever. Maya, Claire, and Laura were about to be drawn together in a way none of them could have imagined. Their worlds were about to collide, and the perfect neighborhood would no longer be the illusion it once seemed. The evening air had turned chilly, and the sound of distant waves crashing against the rocks seemed to echo in Maya's ears as she stood outside the venue for the fundraiser. The building, an old Victorian mansion turned event space, loomed large against the backdrop of the night sky, its windows glowing warmly. Despite the festive atmosphere inside, Maya felt the weight of something heavier pressing on her chest. The event was already in full swing when she arrived, the laughter of guests filtering out into the cool air as they mingled in their best clothes. Maya paused for a moment, her hand resting on the door handle, and for the first time in weeks, she considered turning back. The facade of perfect smiles and polite small talk felt foreign to her, like she was being asked to play a part in a role she no longer knew how to fit. But before she could second-guess herself any longer, Claire appeared beside her, dressed in an elegant emerald green dress that hugged her frame perfectly. Claire was smiling, her face a mask of confidence and poise, the type of woman who seemed to belong in this world without ever questioning it. "You made it," Claire said with an easy smile. "I was starting to think you wouldn't show." Maya forced a smile in return. "I almost didn't." Claire raised an eyebrow, but her smile remained bright. "Well, I'm glad you did. Let's get inside. I've already made the rounds, but there are a few people I think you'll enjoy meeting." Maya followed Claire through the door, stepping into the warmth of the grand hall. The room was filled with well-dressed people, all animated in conversation, drinks in hand, the clinking of glasses creating a pleasant backdrop to the evening's proceedings. There were women in designer dresses, men in tuxedos, and children running around in their best party clothes, laughing and playing. Maya had once been a part of this world, when her marriage was intact, when she was an active member of the community. But now, it felt as though she was watching from the outside. Claire introduced Maya to several people as they moved through the crowd, but Maya's attention was mostly caught by the far-off conversations. She could hear snippets of gossip, of polite exchanges that hid deeper, unspoken emotions. Everyone seemed to have a perfect life, a perfect family. No one had any idea what it felt like to stand at the edge of their life, wondering how it all slipped away. Maya's thoughts were interrupted when Claire turned to her with a concerned look. "Are you okay? You seem distant." Maya snapped back to the moment, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind." Claire nodded knowingly, as if she had just heard the same line a dozen times. I understand. Trust me, I do. But for tonight, let's just enjoy ourselves. We need to relax, let go a little. It'll be good for both of us. Maya wasn't convinced, but she nodded in agreement anyway. Yeah, let's do that. Meanwhile, Laura was standing near the refreshments table, holding a glass of white wine that she had no real interest in drinking. She had been wandering the event for a while now, trying to make sense of the chatter around her, but the whole thing felt like an elaborate performance. Everyone was so perfectly dressed, so perfectly polished, it almost made her feel like she was intruding on something she didn't belong in. She had exchanged pleasantries with a few people, mostly nodding and smiling, but there was always that underlying feeling of being an outsider. No one had invited her into their circle. No one had asked about her life or her past. They didn't know who she was, and maybe that was for the best. But there was one woman who had caught her eye. Claire, with her impeccable fashion and effortless charm, seemed to glide through the room, leaving a trail of admiration in her wake. Laura found herself watching Claire from across the room, studying how easily she moved through the crowd. It was as if Claire had mastered the art of being liked by everyone, as though the facade she presented was as natural to her as breathing. Laura couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. How did Claire do it? How had she become the person everyone wanted to know, the person everyone turned to for approval? Laura had always been good at her job, at least she used to be, but in this crowd, she was just another face. A new face. An unknown. The thought made her uneasy. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden voice beside her. You look a little lost, a woman said, her voice warm and friendly. Laura turned to find Maya standing beside her, offering a small, kind smile. She was dressed simply in a navy dress that was modest but elegant. It was clear she wasn't here to show off, but there was something genuine about her presence. She didn't seem to have the same polished perfection as the others, but in a way, it made Laura feel more at ease. Yeah, Laura chuckled, though it didn't sound as light-hearted as she intended. I'm still getting used to all this. Maya nodded. I get that. I've been coming to these kinds of things for years, but I'm still not quite sure I belong. It's all so curated, you know. Laura raised an eyebrow. Curated. Maya shrugged. Everyone here is trying to present an image. Perfect families, perfect lives. But underneath, there's always more going on. It's easy to forget that sometimes. Laura studied Maya for a moment, sensing the layers beneath her calm exterior. I can relate to that. I've been trying to figure out where I fit in too. Maya's eyes softened with understanding. You just have to be okay with not fitting in. Sometimes, the hardest part is accepting that. For the first time that evening, Laura felt a flicker of something more than just discomfort. It was a connection, a brief moment of honesty that felt rare in this room full of masks. Back across the room, Claire was standing near the stage, chatting with some of the key donors for the event. She felt a slight sense of satisfaction at how well everything was going. People were laughing, talking, donating money to the cause. Everything was running smoothly, just as it always did. She had worked hard for this image of perfection. She had built this life from the ground up, and no one knew the sacrifices it had taken. But as she glanced around, her eyes fell on Maya and Laura talking quietly near the refreshments table. A twinge of jealousy stirred within her. It was subtle, a feeling that Claire quickly dismissed. She couldn't afford to let it take root, not tonight. But there was something about the way they had connected so effortlessly, something that made Claire feel like she was losing control. As the night wore on, the illusion of perfection began to crack just a little. Conversations deepened, subtle gestures betrayed tension, and behind the smiles, the cracks in their carefully constructed lives started to show. Maya, Claire, and Laura had no idea that, by the end of the evening, they would each be forced to confront truths about themselves that they had worked so hard to bury. But for now, they simply moved through the crowd, each with their own secrets, unaware of how much their worlds were about to collide. The evening had been a careful dance of small talk and forced smiles. As the fundraiser continued, the laughter in the room grew louder, the clinking of glasses more frequent. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. An uneasy energy hung in the air, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. It was like the calm before a storm. Maya's conversation with Laura had been brief but real, a rare moment of honesty amidst the facades. Maya had tried to ignore the knot in her stomach, the old familiar ache that had followed her since her marriage ended. She had been so focused on Noah, trying to rebuild the pieces of their relationship, that she hadn't thought much about the loneliness that came with it. But tonight, with Laura's quiet vulnerability and Claire's polished exterior, the truth was impossible to ignore. She'd promised Noah she would be home by 10. And while she wasn't sure if she was ready to face their empty house again, she didn't want to disappoint him. He needed her. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. But as Maya made her way toward the exit, the loud crash of something breaking in the adjacent room made her pause. For a moment, she wondered if it was just another clumsy accident, someone knocking over a drink or a glass. But when she heard raised voices, she knew it was something more. "Stay away from him," a woman's voice screamed. Maya's heart pounded as she turned toward the source of the noise. She could see the crowd gathering around the door to the ballroom, people whispering, trying to peer inside. Curiosity, and a feeling of dread, pushed her toward the crowd. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she knew it wasn't good. The door burst open as a man stumbled out, his face flushed with anger. It was Dave, Claire's husband. His tie was crooked, his shirt untucked, and there was a wildness in his eyes that Maya had never seen before. Behind him, Claire stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale and stricken, her hands clutching her purse as if she were trying to hold herself together. "Someone call the police," shouted a man from the crowd, pushing past Maya to get inside. Maya's pulse quickened as she moved forward, her mind racing with questions. What had happened? Was it an argument gone too far? Had Dave done something worse? The whispers around her grew louder. He hit her. No, that couldn't be true. But the evidence was right there, clear as day. Dave had raised his hand, he had struck someone. And if the rumors were true, it had been Claire. Maya's stomach twisted as she pushed her way through the crowd, her mind buzzing. Was this why Claire had seemed so distant? Was this the mask that Claire had been hiding behind all this time? The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the woman who had it all. But was it all a lie? She reached the doorway and found herself face to face with Claire, whose eyes were wide with shock and fear. Her lips were trembling, but she didn't speak. It was like she couldn't. "Claire," Maya said softly, stepping toward her. "Are you okay?" Claire didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at Maya, her face a mix of disbelief and shame. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know it would get this far." Maya didn't know what to say. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she didn't know where to start. She had no idea how Claire had ended up in this situation, how a woman like her could find herself trapped in a relationship like this. But one thing was certain, everything Maya had assumed about Claire, about the perfect life she had created, was shattered in an instant. The room fell silent as Laura stepped forward, her face full of concern. She had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the scene unfold in shock. But now, she was stepping into the chaos, her instincts kicking in. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Is she okay?" Claire finally managed to speak, though her voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't mean to. It escalated." Maya's heart broke for Claire. She knew the pain of living with secrets, the feeling of being trapped, but this was something else. Something deeper. And in that moment, Maya realized how little she really knew about her friend. The police arrived shortly after, and the room began to clear out, the guests scattering to give the officers space to work. Maya and Laura stood together, unsure of what to do or say. The shock of what they had witnessed still hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "She'll be okay, won't she?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maya didn't have an answer. She had no idea how Claire would move forward from this, or if she even could. There were no easy answers when it came to situations like this. No clean breaks. Just a tangled mess of emotions and consequences. And in the midst of it all, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had just been irrevocably changed. The tragedy that had unfolded in front of them wasn't just about Claire and Dave. It was about the unraveling of everything they had believed to be true. Their perfect lives, their carefully constructed facades, none of it was as it seemed. The night ended in a blur of emotions and unanswered questions. Maya left the mansion, the cool air hitting her like a slap in the face, and she tried to push away the images of what she had seen. She couldn't get Claire's face out of her mind, the way she had stood there, broken and trembling. And the look in Dave's eyes as he had stormed out of the room, rage, desperation, fear. Noah was waiting for her when she got home, his eyes tired but full of love. He didn't ask about the fundraiser or the chaos that had unfolded inside. He just needed his mother. He needed her to be there, to be present. And for the first time in a long while, Maya realized that maybe that was all she really had left, the people who needed her, the people who cared, even when the world seemed to fall apart. She didn't know what would happen to Claire, or how they would all move forward from tonight. But for now, she had Noah. And that was enough. At least, for tonight. The days following the fundraiser were a blur of confusion and quiet. The evening had left a mark on everyone who had witnessed it, but for Maya, Claire, and Laura, the aftermath felt like a slow unraveling of their carefully constructed lives. The event had been a turning point, a crack in the perfect facade they had all been hiding behind. Maya couldn't shake the image of Claire's face, pale and broken, standing in the doorway of the ballroom. She had known there was something off about Claire, something hidden beneath the surface of the perfect life she seemed to project, but this? This was a revelation that shattered everything Maya had believed about their friendship. At home, Noah had been uncharacteristically quiet, his teenage angst becoming more pronounced with each passing day. Maya didn't know how to fix it, or even if she could. The silence between them was growing wider, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't bridge the gap. It was as though the weight of her own struggles had become too heavy for her to carry alone. Noah's anger had always been there, simmering just beneath the surface, but now it seemed to be spilling out in small bursts. He was late coming home from school, spending more time locked in his room than talking to her. Maya understood that this was part of the growing pains of adolescence, but she couldn't help but wonder if the collapse of her marriage was the real cause of the distance between them. Tonight, as she stood in the kitchen, trying to prepare a meal that she knew neither of them would truly enjoy, she thought back to her conversation with Laura at the fundraiser. That small moment of connection had been a lifeline in the midst of the chaos, and yet now, it felt like another world altogether. Laura had seemed so genuine, so honest in the midst of everything. But even Laura had her own struggles, her own secrets. Just as she was lost in thought, her phone buzzed on the counter. She reached over and saw Claire's name on the screen. "Hey," Maya said, picking up the phone, trying to sound casual. "Are you okay?" There was a long pause before Claire answered, her voice strained and tired. "I don't know if I'll ever be okay, Maya. I don't know where to go from here." Maya's heart sank. She knew Claire was struggling, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "What happened, Claire? What's really going on? You can't keep hiding this." "I know," Claire whispered. "But I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to get out. He says he loves me, but I don't think I've ever felt more alone." Claire's voice trembled, breaking through the carefully maintained calm. "I'm scared, Maya. I don't know if I can keep pretending." Maya closed her eyes, the weight of her friend's words pressing down on her. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Claire. You deserve more than this. You deserve to be happy." Claire's breath hitched. "I'm scared of what will happen if I leave. If I tell anyone the truth. What if it destroys everything? What if he hurts me more? He's already hurting me, and I don't know if I can live like this anymore." The words hung in the air like a cloud, and Maya felt a pang of sorrow for her friend. This wasn't just about a marriage falling apart, it was about survival. It was about the courage to face the truth when everything you had believed in was shattered. "You don't have to do this alone," Maya said softly. "I'm here for you. Whatever you need." But even as she said the words, she knew that they weren't enough. No words could fix what Claire was going through. It wasn't that simple. But at least Maya could be there to listen, to offer support in whatever way she could. Claire was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the phone line. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Laura had been struggling with her own demons since the fundraiser, and though she tried to keep busy, she couldn't escape the haunting thoughts that lingered in the back of her mind. The image of Dave's rage, of Claire standing there, trembling, had followed her for days. It was something she couldn't unsee, something she couldn't ignore. And yet, despite all of that, she still found herself drawn to the idea of connecting with Claire. Of offering her friendship, even if it was in a way that felt completely inadequate. But Laura had never been one to shy away from discomfort. If she was going to make a new start in Monterey, she needed to be part of something real. And that meant confronting her own fears, her own insecurities. That afternoon, she had gone to the cafe where she had seen the group of women she envied at the fundraiser, the ones who always seemed to have it all together. They were sitting in the corner, laughing, chatting over coffee, and Laura couldn't help but feel the familiar pang of jealousy. She had never been able to blend in with the crowd like that, to laugh so effortlessly. It wasn't that she didn't want to, it was that she didn't know how. But today was different. She wasn't going to wait for an invitation. Today, she was going to walk up to them. With a deep breath, Laura approached the table and cleared her throat. The women looked up, surprised at first, and then one of them, a woman named Jenna, smiled warmly. "Hey, Laura. How's it going?" Laura felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. "I was hoping I could join you guys. If that's okay." There was a brief pause before Jenna nodded. "Of course. We'd love to have you. Pull up a chair." The conversation flowed easily from there, and for the first time since moving to Monterey, Laura felt like she was part of something. She was no longer the outsider looking in. She wasn't sure how long this feeling would last, but for now, it was enough. As they chatted, Laura couldn't help but wonder about the other women in the group. Were they hiding their own secrets, their own vulnerabilities? She didn't know, but she was beginning to realize that maybe the perfect life she had once aspired to wasn't as real as it seemed. Maybe everyone had a story, a struggle, and perhaps, she wasn't the only one trying to figure things out. Meanwhile, Maya sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from her. She had spent the evening on the phone with Claire, trying to offer whatever support she could, but the words had felt hollow. She wasn't sure what Claire needed, what any of them needed. She didn't know how to fix their lives or even how to fix her own. But as the silence stretched on, Maya realized that there was one thing she could do. She could be there for them. She could be the friend who didn't turn away when things got hard. The one who stayed. And as she looked down at her phone, the buzzing notifications from Claire still hanging in her mind, she knew that the tension in the air wasn't going to disappear anytime soon. The storm that had started at the fundraiser was only just beginning. The cracks were there. They couldn't be ignored. And no matter how hard they tried to maintain the illusion of perfection, the truth would always find a way to come to the surface. The days after the fundraiser blurred into a slow, agonizing rhythm. For Maya, every phone call, every awkward silence with Noah, seemed to echo the unresolved tension in her life. The weight of her own choices hung heavily on her, and no matter how hard she tried to push it away, the truth kept creeping in. Her life was not the picture of stability she had imagined it would be after her divorce. There had been moments of hope, but they always seemed fleeting. What had she really done to reclaim her own happiness? Had she truly embraced this new chapter of her life, or was she just surviving? The small moments with Noah were precious, but they weren't enough to fill the void she felt inside. Noah, still locked in his quiet world, was becoming harder to reach. Maya couldn't remember the last time he had spoken to her without a tinge of bitterness. He spent hours in his room, the door always closed, the silence a constant reminder of how fractured their relationship had become. She had tried over and over to break through, but it felt as though she was talking to a stranger. One afternoon, Maya stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. She had stopped wearing the oversized sweaters and sweatpants that had become her uniform in the months following the divorce. She had started to care more about how she looked, to make an effort to reclaim some sense of herself. But no matter how she dressed, or how much she forced a smile, the person she saw staring back at her felt like someone she didn't recognize. Who had she become? What was left of the woman she used to be? The sound of her phone vibrating on the dresser broke her from her thoughts. It was a text from Claire. "I need to talk. Can we meet?" Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed her jacket, grabbed her keys, and left the house without a second thought. Claire sat in a quiet corner of a local cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the steam rising in delicate tendrils that swirled into the air. It had been days since the fundraiser, and still, the event played out in her mind like an endless loop. Dave's rage. The terrified look on her face. The chaos. She hadn't been able to stop thinking about it, hadn't been able to silence the voices in her head that told her she had failed. Failed as a wife. Failed as a mother. As Maya slid into the chair across from her, Claire didn't look up. She stared at her tea, her fingers tracing the edges of the cup. Maya could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the hollow look that told her Claire hadn't slept in days. She hadn't been eating well either. Maya could tell by the tightness of her face and the paleness of her skin. "Maya," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. She lifted her eyes to meet Maya's, and Maya could see the unshed tears there, waiting to spill over. Maya leaned forward, her heart aching for her friend. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, Claire." Claire let out a shaky breath and placed the teacup down gently. She wiped her eyes quickly, but the tears were already falling. "I don't know what to do anymore. I can't live like this. But I don't know how to get out. I'm trapped. Trapped in this life I've built, this lie I've created." Her voice broke, and for the first time, the mask of perfection slipped completely. "I'm scared," she confessed, the words spilling out in a rush. "I don't know who I am without him. I've been so dependent on him for so long. I feel like I've lost myself. I don't even know where to begin to start over." Maya reached across the table, her hand gently covering Claire's. "You don't have to do this alone, Claire. You don't have to keep pretending. You're not trapped. You've been hiding for too long, but it's time to stop hiding. I know it's scary, but it's the only way to move forward. You have to take the first step." Claire's lips trembled. "What if I fail? What if everything falls apart?" "Then you rebuild. One step at a time." Claire wiped her tears away and nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so tired, Maya. I'm so tired of pretending." "You don't have to pretend anymore," Maya said softly. "I'm right here, and I'll help you." The weight in Claire's eyes softened, just slightly, as if the tiniest seed of hope had been planted. It wasn't much, but it was something. A step. A beginning. Meanwhile, Laura had been avoiding the truth in her own way. She had spent days distracting herself with the new group of women she had started to connect with. The surface-level friendships had given her a temporary reprieve from her own loneliness, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she was merely filling a void. She was still running from herself. But the mask she had been wearing was starting to crack. The more she spent time with Claire, and the more she watched Maya's quiet strength, the more she realized that maybe she was looking for validation in the wrong places. The validation she craved, whether from her new friends, her career or her past, was never going to come from external sources. It had to come from within. As she sat alone in her apartment that evening, Laura looked around at the boxes still stacked in the corner. The unpacked items were a physical manifestation of her own unsettled life, a life that still felt foreign. She wasn't sure where to begin either. The truth she had been avoiding for months was creeping in, demanding attention. Who was she now? Laura had been running from the failure of her career, from the weight of a life she felt she had lost. She had moved to Monterey to escape, but now, sitting in the silence, she realized that the place she had tried to outrun wasn't somewhere outside of her, it was inside. She needed to face the truth of who she had become and find a way to forgive herself. She reached for her phone and, without thinking, sent a message to Maya. "Can we talk soon? I think I'm ready to be honest with myself. With everyone." She stared at the message for a long time before hitting send, her heart racing. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the honesty that would follow. But she knew that she couldn't keep running anymore. Back at Maya's house that evening, she sat on the couch, her phone resting on the table in front of her. She felt the weight of the conversation she had just had with Claire and Laura, the promises of change, the small steps toward redemption that they were all making. They were each at a crossroads in their lives, and it was clear that none of them had figured it all out. But they were trying. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Noah came downstairs, his face a little less guarded than it had been in recent days. He sat down beside her, the silence between them a little less strained. Maya didn't know if they could fix everything, but maybe, just maybe, they could start by being there for each other. As Noah glanced over at her, she offered him a smile, a real one this time, and he smiled back. It wasn't a huge shift, but it was progress. And for the first time in months, Maya felt the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe they could begin to heal. The weeks following that quiet evening seemed to pass in a haze for Maya, Claire and Laura. The events that had shaken their lives at the fundraiser had sent ripples through their personal worlds, changing them in ways they couldn't yet understand. The weight of the secrets they had been holding on to, each of them clinging to their own form of perfection, had become too heavy to bear. Now it seemed that each of them was at a precipice, teetering between the lives they had lived and the ones they were starting to imagine. For Maya, the truth had always been a distant shadow, something she didn't want to acknowledge. But as the days passed, she realized that in order to move forward, she had to face it. She had to confront the parts of her past that had been haunting her for years. Her marriage to Ethan. The shame of failure, of not being enough. The guilt over the way her son had been affected by their breakup. Her life had fractured, yes, but in the process, she had gained something she hadn't expected, a glimpse of herself again. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that small spark of self-awareness gave her the courage to take the next step. It was a rainy Friday afternoon when Maya invited Claire over. The storm had been building all day, and now it was pouring outside, the dark clouds casting a shadow over the living room. Maya had made tea, and they sat together, the silence between them a little more comfortable than it had been before. Claire was quieter than usual, her eyes still haunted by the events of that night, but there was something different in her posture. She wasn't as guarded. She wasn't as afraid. "You're not alone in this," Maya said gently, setting her cup down. "You don't have to pretend anymore. I see you, Claire. The real you. You don't have to hide." Claire's breath caught, and she wiped away the single tear that had fallen from her eye. "I've been hiding for so long, Maya. I don't even know who I am without the lie." Maya leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You are not your past. You are not the person who stayed in a toxic relationship for the sake of appearance. You are so much more than that. And you don't have to keep punishing yourself. We'll figure this out together. But you need to take the first step." The words hung in the air, and Claire swallowed hard, her emotions raw. She had spent so many years trying to hold it all together, to create a perfect image of her family, her life. But now that image had shattered, and she was forced to face the pieces, to figure out who she was beneath it all. "I'm scared," Claire whispered. "What if I fail?" Maya shook her head, her expression soft. "The only way you can fail is if you never try. You can do this, Claire. One day at a time." For the first time in a long while, Claire felt the tiniest spark of hope. It was fragile, but it was there. Maybe Maya was right. Maybe she didn't need to keep hiding. Maybe it was time to start living again. Laura had also been facing her own version of truth. The surface-level friendships she had cultivated over the past few months had started to feel like a mask she was slipping behind. The real question was, who was she pretending for? Her friends, her new life, or herself? One evening, as she sat in her apartment, staring out the window at the storm outside, she decided that it was time to stop running. It was time to face the ghosts she had been avoiding for so long, the guilt over her failed career, the lingering feelings of inadequacy, the fear that she wasn't enough. She had spent so much of her life chasing approval from others, but now, she was starting to realize that the only approval that truly mattered was her own. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. Laura had to face the woman she had become, the decisions that had led her here. And in doing so, she found a strange kind of clarity. Maya and Laura had met for coffee a few days after Claire's conversation, the air still thick with the storm's remnants. They had been exchanging stories of their pasts, their failures, their dreams. And for the first time, there was no shame in their words, no fear of judgment. "I feel like I'm finally seeing things clearly," Laura said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I've been running from everything. From my career, from my mistakes. I thought a fresh start would fix it all, but the truth is, I can't outrun myself. I need to face what happened and forgive myself." Maya nodded, understanding all too well the difficulty of confronting those truths. "It's not easy. I've been running too. Running from the shame, from the idea that I wasn't enough. But the truth is, we are enough. We always have been." For the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she was starting to reclaim her life. She didn't have all the answers, and she certainly didn't have a perfect life. But she had a deep understanding of herself now, of her worth, and that made all the difference. Later that evening, Maya, Claire, and Laura all came together at Maya's house, the storm having finally passed. They sat together, quietly drinking tea, each of them reflecting on the conversations they had had, the steps they had taken, the truths they were learning to live with. "Maya's right," Claire said, her voice quieter now but stronger than before. "I've been hiding behind this perfect image of myself for too long. I've been terrified of what will happen if I let it all fall apart. But maybe it's time for a new start." "I think we're all ready for that," Laura added, her tone thoughtful. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be real. The three of them sat in silence for a while, the weight of their individual truths hanging in the air, but no longer suffocating them. For the first time in a long while, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond that no longer relied on perfection or pretense. The truth was out in the open, and though it had shaken them all to their cores, it also freed them. There would be no more pretending. No more hiding behind masks. They had faced the darkness within themselves, and in doing so, they had learned to stand in the light. The road ahead would be uncertain, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But they were no longer alone. They had each other. And for the first time in a long time, they were ready to move forward, not as the women they had been, but as the women they were becoming. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Maya's living room, casting a soft, golden light across the room. It was the kind of morning that felt peaceful, like the calm after a storm, but Maya knew the truth: the storm hadn't passed. It had just changed. It had become something new, something they could all learn to live with. Maya sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, staring out the window at the quiet street. It had been a few months since that night at the fundraiser, the night everything had come undone, and in the days since, she had seen her life shift in ways she never could have imagined. The truth had been unkind at times, revealing things she wasn't ready to face. But it had also set her free. The things she had spent years hiding from, the guilt, the shame, had begun to lose their hold over her. The phone buzzed on the table, pulling Maya from her thoughts. She glanced at it and saw Claire's name flashing on the screen. "Hi Claire," Maya answered, a smile tugging at her lips. "Maya," Claire's voice came through, light and warm, "I wanted to thank you again. For everything. I'm getting a divorce." Maya paused for a moment, feeling a wave of relief and sadness wash over her. "Are you sure, Claire? I mean, it's a big step." "I'm sure," Claire said, a quiet strength in her voice. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I'm scared, but I'm not alone anymore. I've started seeing a counselor. I'm working on myself. It's time for a new chapter." Maya smiled. "I'm proud of you, Claire. I really am. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. You gave me the courage to face the truth. You reminded me that I deserve more than this. More than him." There was a long pause, and Maya could hear Claire breathing softly on the other end of the line. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was progress. It was freedom. "I'm going to be okay," Claire continued. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm going to find my own way. Finally." Meanwhile, Laura was sitting in her apartment, the soft hum of the morning city just outside her window. She had come a long way since her own moment of truth. It hadn't been easy, but she had started to rebuild. Her days were filled with small steps, taking a yoga class, meeting new people, even picking up the phone to reconnect with old friends. She hadn't gone back to her old career yet, but she had begun to open herself up to new possibilities. She had even joined the local art group, something she had always wanted to do but had never dared. She was slowly starting to find the woman she had forgotten. She had learned to accept that she didn't need to be perfect, that she could be messy, vulnerable, and still worthy of love. Her phone rang, and she picked it up, seeing Maya's name flashing across the screen. "Hey Laura," Maya said, her voice warm. "I just talked to Claire. She's made the decision to leave Dave. She's finally taking control of her life." Laura smiled softly, a sense of peace settling over her. "I'm so happy for her. She deserves this. It's going to be hard, but it's the right thing." "Yeah," Maya said, her tone thoughtful. "It's going to be hard. But it's the first step. Just like you, Laura. You're taking your own steps forward, and I'm proud of you." Laura could hear the sincerity in Maya's voice, and it made her heart swell with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't think I would have had the courage to take them without your support. I've been looking at life all wrong, Maya. I've spent too much time trying to fix myself, but maybe I don't need to be fixed at all." Maya smiled. "Exactly. You don't need to be fixed. You're already whole. You just need to give yourself permission to live the life you want. You're doing it, Laura. One step at a time." The conversation ended on a high note, both women carrying the same quiet optimism in their hearts. They had each taken a different path, but they were all walking toward the same destination, a future free from the chains of their pasts. In the months that followed, Maya continued to rebuild her life with Noah. The silence that had once hung between them had softened, replaced by real conversations and shared moments of understanding. They didn't have all the answers, but they were learning to navigate their new normal together. The road ahead wasn't going to be perfect. There would still be days when the shadows of the past would creep in, but Maya knew she had the strength to face them. She had learned something important through this whole process: healing wasn't linear. Some days would be better than others, and some would be harder. But she was no longer afraid of the hard days. She knew that, no matter what, she had a community of women who had been there for her and who would continue to walk with her. One Saturday afternoon, the three women, Maya, Claire and Laura, met at the local park. It was sunny, the air crisp and fresh with the promise of spring. Maya and Claire sat on a bench, chatting easily as Laura jogged laps around the small pond nearby, her stride strong and confident. It had become a ritual for them to meet like this. They would talk about their lives, share their victories, and support each other through the challenges. They no longer needed to hide behind the walls they had built for so long. They were learning to live authentically, embracing both the light and the dark parts of themselves. "Maya, I can't believe how much has changed in just a few months," Claire said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I used to be so scared of being alone. But now, I'm starting to see that I'm never truly alone. I've got you too." Maya smiled, her heart full. "You've always had us, Claire. You just needed to see it for yourself." Laura jogged over, sweat glistening on her forehead, her face lit with a smile. "You guys are making me emotional," she said, laughing as she wiped her brow. Claire chuckled. "We're just proud of each other. We've come a long way." And they had. They had come a long way from the women they once were, the women who had hidden behind their facades, afraid to show their true selves. They had each taken the first step toward healing, and while the road ahead was still long, they knew they could face it together. As they sat together on the bench, the sun beginning to set behind them, they each felt a sense of peace settle into their hearts. They were no longer defined by the mistakes of their pasts or the roles they had played for so long. They were women in progress, embracing the beauty of their flaws, their growth, and the strength they had discovered within themselves. They weren't perfect. And they didn't need to be. They were free.